really weird week, like all the way around. It was confusing. So, first of all, sorry about Wednesday, but when you've got 5 kids and a wife, it's pretty inevitable somebody in your house is going to be sick. So it was, my wife had a fever, and I was like, all right, we're all not leaving the house for a minute. And she's good. We're in the so we're good. So sorry about that. So we just got pushed back today. But it's all good, baby. We're here. We'll be able to catch up, I'm sure, because you guys are not talkative at all. So we'll be able to move through a lot of things. Before we get into the content of today, I just want to be clear. If we're going to engage in some discussion today, right, I'm going to be posing questions to you. And I want you to keep in mind what we talked about on the syllabus on Monday of, I want you guys to engage. I need you to engage. And not be afraid of like, well, is that what he's looking for? Is this right? What we're talking about today has no right answers, right? It's about understanding your thought process. And so it's going to be really important that we have that kind of engagement today and that back and forth. That being said, if I don't remember your name yet, don't take it personally. I've known you for 50 minutes of my entire life. It's going to take me a little while. So if I look at you and don't remember your name, don't get offended. It's just, I'm old. I've had a lot of head trauma. It's not you. You're very memorable. You're a wonderful, great person whose parents love you deeply. I'm just really bad at that kind of shit. So don't be offended. That being said, what are we talking about today? We're talking about critical thinking. Critical thinking is a term that you hear used a whole hell of a lot in education, right? Every teacher you probably had since the 6th grade has told you about the importance of critical thinking and how you need to use critical thinking and blah, 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 critical thinking. It's a huge buzzword in education, but one of the things I've discovered is that teachers like to say the word and never explain it. Like I said, I have 5 kids ranging from 19 all the way down to 6 years old. And all the time, my kids will come home with homework. And part of the homework is, like, make sure you engage your critical thinking to do this. And I'll ask my kids, like, what does that mean? What do you think that means? Well, I don't know. What did your teacher say it meant? Well, I don't know. So me being the dick that I am, right, I encourage my children to embarrass their teacher. Because, they deserve it. So I'll tell my kids, like, okay, when you go back to school, ask, Mrs. So-and-so, what does she mean by critical thinking? And tell me what her answer is. And there's never an answer. They never are able to articulate what the hell that means. Right? And it drives me up a wall, both as a parent and as a teacher, because that's just so unfair. It's so unfair to say, I'm grading you, I'm judging you based on your ability to do X, but I'm not going to tell you what the hell X is. I'm not going to explain to you or give you any kind of guidance on it at all, just you should know this. But they don't even fucking know it. It bothers me. It really bothers me. So as a result, I have included this in every class I teach. In fact, I have a whole semester-long class called Critical Thinking in the spring, which counts as a humanities general education credit. So where we do 16 weeks of just evaluating your thought process. How can you improve upon your thought process? How can you understand your own flawed thoughts better? I like to do just a real bare minimum overview in every class because critical thinking is actually really important. It really is an important skill to have, especially right now, and especially in a class like this, where media literacy and media competence are the name of the game. You have to be able to look at media through a critical lens and analyze it in a real, honest way and not just with this surface level nonsense. So that's why we do this unit on critical thinking, right? This is kind of above and beyond what any textbook would have for a class like this, but I feel is absolutely critical for a class like this. Well, like I said, one of my biggest frustrations is that a lot of teachers use the phrase critical thinking, but never tell you what the hell that is. Let's start with what the hell that is, right? What is critical thinking? Believe it or not, there's actually an organization called the Critical Thinking Foundation, right? It's a group of people that's dedicated just to studying critical thinking and the application and teaching of critical thinking. They're dorks. They're nerdier than librarians, right? They're really scary, sad people, which is why I usually go to the conference. The Critical Thinking Foundation has defined critical thinking, and they define it as a process in which a person tries to answer rationally those questions that cannot be easily answered and for which all the relevant information is not available. There are 6 of you in this room right now, 6 students. 5 of you are writing down that definition. Why?
That's what our high school teachers told me to do. Yeah.
Habit?
Yep.
Be honest, right? Because this doesn't affect you. This is no harm done. Do you actually go back and look at your notes after you take them?
Heck no.
Man. If you do, when do you look at them?
On a test if the teachers let us do it.
Right before a test, right? Right before a test. Do you use it? You'll write this shit down. It is August 21st, 2020. You will write this information down and you will never look at it again until maybe the day before the test. So why the fuck are you doing it? Does it help?
Nope.
No! Then why are you doing it?
High school teachers? Yeah.
It really is. It's just conditioned. And that's the most important thing to think about when we talk about critical thinking is, why are you doing what you're doing? How many things do we do in our daily life where we don't even know why we're doing it? It's just something we've unquestioningly done because we were told to do it over and over and over again. Don't have any rhyme or reason to it. Now that's not me saying like, don't do what your parents tell you, right? It's if you don't know why you're doing it, how could you possibly be good at it? If you don't know why you're doing anything, how could you possibly do it right? How could you possibly do it better? That's a lot of fucking words. That's a really, really, really detailed definition. But what does it actually say? Put that into your own words for me.
Using logic to answer questions even if you don't have all the information.
Yes! Using logic to answer questions you might not have all the information for. Good! Can we go a bit shorter? Can we simplify it even more, anybody? Have any of you ever heard of a guy named Kurt Vonnegut?
Yeah.
Yeah? Who was Kurt Vonnegut?
He's an author.
Yeah, he was an author. He was probably, some consider him to be like the preeminent American author of the 20th century. Right? He was a phenomenal talent, wrote many incredibly important works of literature. Before he passed away, one of his last books, in fact, it might have been his last book, was called A Man Without a Country. And it's kind of, it's not really a memoir, but it's kind of a self-reflection kind of a thing that he did. And he has a whole chapter in there about the culture's fascination with critical thinking, right? He writes extensively about how people love to talk about critical thinking, but like I said, never actually tell you what that means, right? They just look at the term. And Kurt Vonnegut, I mean, he was a writer and he was brilliant, so obviously had a way with words. He was able to give what I think is probably the best possible definition of critical thinking. And Kurt Vonnegut defined it as a good guess. Isn't that exactly what this means? I mean, there's a lot more verbiage here. There's a lot more, like fancifulness here. This is the academic definition. This is the normal human being definition. It's a good guess. A person tries to answer rationally, which is, guessing, those questions that cannot be easily answered and for which all relevant information is not available. So you're trying to make a good guess. That's really what critical thinking is. I have my kids relay that back to their teachers. When their teachers can't define it, I'm like, tell them it's a good guess. They're like, no, it's more than that. Okay, how much more? Tell me specifically how much more. What is it that is different from a good guess? Well, you have to... Exactly. Shut up. I know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm talking about. Again, every class you're going to have for the rest of your collegiate career, whether the rest of your collegiate career lasts this semester or 12 more years, your classes, your instructors, your professors will pound into you the importance of critical thinking. Politely, respectfully, Ask them to define it for you. Okay, well, for your purposes, how could I show you I'm thinking critically? Can I give you an answer? If they can't, why are you doing it? To me, it would be like if I'm teaching auto mechanics, right? Which I should never fucking do. If I'm teaching auto mechanics, but I don't know how to change the oil in a car, can I really fairly evaluate you on whether or not you can change the oil in a car? You know the old expression, those who can do, those who can't teach? Fuck those people. And you have my permission. If you ever hear somebody say that, punch him in the throat, or call me and I'll punch him in the throat. Because it's bullshit. It's absolute horseshit. Right? If your instructor, no matter what they do, if you're getting a PhD, and your thesis advisor, your dissertation advisor is telling you to use critical thinking, but they can't tell you what critical thinking means, it's bullshit. It's just absolute bullshit, right? So let's get more specific then, right? We've defined it, but how do you actually do it? Again, according to the Critical Thinking Foundation, according to this group of people, there are 8 structures of thought that our minds need to engage in deliberately to be a good critical thinker. There are 8 things we need to work through before we can really make a good decision in any particular case. The first is by recognizing that when we think for a purpose. There's a reason, right? There's a purpose behind our brain's engagement. I like to use the analogy of your brain is a car engine, right? Both require energy to operate. Both, require a precious resource to operate. And you wouldn't go start your car in the morning with nowhere to go, right? If you're not going anywhere, you're not going to start your car and just let it run for 3 hours, burn gas. You wouldn't waste that resource. That'd be insane. Well, your brain's the same way. If your brain is going to engage, if it's going to fire up, there's a reason. Sometimes it's very apparent. Sometimes it's really obvious why our brain is engaging and working through these processes. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes we kind of get caught off guard of like, why is this such a hard decision? Why is this troubling me? Not every decision needs to be critically decided. Not every decision has to engage in this process. When I leave work today and I try to figure out what I want for lunch, I don't have to go through a real deep process to figure out what I want. I want Taco Bell. It's okay, done. Right? I don't have to debate with myself the merits. It's like, just get the fucking burrito and be happy. But sometimes you do need to engage and think more deeply and think more logically and more in depth about the consequences of the decision you're making, about the nature of the decision you're making, right? I've been married for 8 years. Feels like a long ass time. But my wife doesn't watch this, it's fine. It's fun to see this camera allows me to stream in 360. And my wife was like, oh, you should stream that. I'm like, no, that's a horrible idea. That's a horrible idea. I've been married for 8 years. And if there's one thing I have learned, right, through marriage, I was married once before, married this time 8 years. The one thing I've learned about marriage is every decision is a critical decision. If I'm deciding for myself what I want for lunch, fuck, whatever, dude. Wherever has the shortest line, I'm good. I like Taco Bell, but I'll eat something from everywhere. If my wife is involved, that's a whole different fucking process. If my kids are involved, it's an even more insane process, right? I have to know, what is the point here? What is the purpose of my brain? Is it just because I want to get food? Or is it because I want to get my wife happy? I want my children to actually eat. What is my actual purpose here? Why is my brain going through this process? When we think within a point of view. We all have our own unique perspective on the world, and that's a good thing. It's a very good thing. But it's also a very limited thing, right? Very limited. One of the things I talk about in some of my other classes is culture. We talk a lot about culture and how cultures blend together and how cultures identify who you are. Excuse me. And one of the points I make in there is that we are all members of multiple different cultures. And it is that amalgamation of those cultures that makes us unique, right? I'm from Rockford, so I'm better than you. I'm a dad, I'm 40 years old, I'm married, I'm straight, I'm a Cubs fan, I'm a Bears fan, right? I'm the youngest of 5 kids. All of these different things that make up who I am affect how I see the world. I see the world very differently than somebody who was born and raised in Los Angeles. Even if it's another 40-year-old straight white man with 5 kids who's married and who teaches, just the fact that they grew up in LA and I grew up in Rockford is going to make us see the world in different ways. And that's not only a good thing, but that's something we need to embrace and something we need to own. And realizing that our perspective is limited. Our perspective is important, but it's limited. Because the greater point here is that your point of view is what you think from, but it's not the only point of view you can think from. Even my wife will admit I'm a hell of a lot smarter than her. Like, it's embarrassing, almost illegal for me to be married to her. Differentiation there. I'm a hell of a lot smarter than her. But when we started having kids, it turns out I'm a fucking idiot, right? The oldest 3 kids are my wife's kids from a previous marriage, but my stepkids. She had already raised 3 children by the time we met. I had raised dogs. Which, in my youth I was like, oh, same thing. Raising a puppy, raising a human. They're not at all. But when we had our first daughter, I didn't know anything. I realized how stupid I was when it came to this, right? How completely limited my abilities and skill set and knowledge base were when it came to, not allowing a human to die. I needed my wife's perspective, because one of the things that, if you guys ever have kids, one of the things that you quickly realize is everything scares the shit out of you. The first time the baby is sneezing, you're like, oh my God, oh, fuck. The first time my wife left me alone with our baby to go back to work, oh my God. It was I was going to bubble wrap the whole house, right? Nobody was allowed to move. Every sudden noise that happened, I was immediately freaking out, right? And then by the time our other daughter came along, I was like, oh, okay, whatever, if any of you are younger children, if you have older siblings, ask your parents. They'll tell you. They stop caring, right? The first kid, everything is ah! I'm the 5th. By the time I came along, my parents did nothing fucking faze them. If I was gone for 3 days, they were like, whatever, dude, you weren't in jail. My oldest sister, however, everything was, okay, what's she doing? Where's she going? You have that point of view that changes the way you see everything that comes after it. You need to acknowledge what your point of view is and acknowledge that it's your point of view. Do not confuse your perception of the world with everyone's perception of the world. Do not confuse your anecdotal experience with evidence. It's not. I've been teaching speech for 17 years because I'm an idiot. And one of the things that's most frustrating to me in a speech class is when someone gives a persuasive speech about why you should not wear your seatbelt or why you should not wear a helmet. Because those arguments always come down to the exact same argument. They always come down to the exact same thing. I know a guy. Who wasn't wearing his seatbelt, and that's what saved his life, because it threw him from the car. So you shouldn't wear a seatbelt either. I know a guy who was wearing a helmet, but he still died. So why wear a helmet? That's incredibly stupid. That's incredibly short-sighted. It's kind of... I used to care if I offended people when I say this. I no longer do. It's like anti-vax people. Well, I know a kid who got vaccinated and got autism. So, that's not a causal link. Your perspective, and I get it. I get it, right? Jenny McCarthy is stupid to begin with, so I get why she would feel this way. But also as a parent, if something happened and then my child suffered some kind of an illness or disease or injury, sure, I would feel strongly about it. But we have to be reasonable enough to say, wait, that's my skewed perspective on it, right? That's my perception of it that's based on very limited data. I get why it's difficult. Emotion makes it difficult to remove yourself from that. But to be a good critical thinker, you have to recognize the limitation of your point of view. When we think based on assumptions. We things for granted. There's always things that we just take for granted and don't bother questioning. Because to be honest, we don't always need to. I've never woken up in the morning and went, I don't know, man. Gravity seems kind of bullshit. Right? I've never had to wake up in the morning and challenge those assumptions. Those are things I accept. Right? When I'm determining whether or not I want Taco Bell or Wendy's, right, I don't have to go over every assumption I have to get to that decision. There are a lot of things I can take for granted. Like, I can assume that both are open because it's new. Right? I can assume that both will take my money. I don't have to question those things. The problem with assumptions is when we hold to those assumptions in light of contradictory evidence. Right? When that assumption becomes truth, despite evidence to the contrary. Yeah. I freely admit, I'm judgmental as fuck. I walk in the room, I look at you, and I immediately pigeonhole you into an archetype of student. As soon as I look at a class of students, I know who's who. In my head, I'm like, oh, there's the fucking grade hawk. There's one who's going to be arguing with me about a 99 versus 100. Oh, there's one who's not going to shut the fuck up all the time. Right? I immediately look and judge and say, based upon my experience, that's the kind of person you are. And you do too. You might not be free to admit it, but you all do. It's human nature. But then if 8 weeks in, Trent, right? New Jersey. If 8 weeks into this class, Trent has proven through his actions, through his deeds, through his words, that he's a good guy. But I still am holding on to this. God, Trent's a dick. God, did you see his face? Man, that first day, he was such a smug little bastard. Oh, I'm so great, I speak ASL. Like, what the fuck? If 8 weeks from now, that's still how I view him, that's my problem, right? Then I have a problem. Having an assumption isn't wrong. It's using assumptions to replace facts, to replace evidence. That's where we get into trouble. But again, like with our point of view, we need to acknowledge and recognize what our assumptions are. What are the things we take for granted? One of the things we talked about in the class later this semester in media, when we talk about media and society and media reflection, is the idea of normativity and how media reflects the normativity of a culture, right? And that's where we talk about things like heteronormativity, masculine normativity, right? We grow up watching media and thinking that's normal because that's what we see, right? And we think it's weird when somebody violates those norms. Well, again, it's because we've grown up just assuming that's the truth. We've grown up just not questioning why that is. When we think, those thoughts lead to implications and consequences. Implications is one of my favorite words, by the way. I say it a lot. Those thoughts lead to implications and consequences. We can't make decisions in a vacuum, right? What we do has effects on other things, on other people, on other aspects. The example I tend to use for this is, let's say you're driving to school, you're about 2 miles out from campus, you've got 10 minutes until class starts, and you get a flat tire. Well, what do? One option, change your tire as fast as you can, but you're going to be late to class. Another option is just say, fuck it, not my day. Take your time, change your tire, go home, send an email to your professor. Another option is, it's only 2 miles. I could drive on my road for 2 miles. I just really need to get to class. You need to think about the consequences of each one of those potential decisions. And that should play a huge role in determining which avenue you go down. Right? For some of us, our car is our livelihood. And the well-being of our car is paramount. So there's no way in hell I'm going to risk damaging my car by driving on a flat. For some of us, not that big of a deal, right? We know somebody who can fix it pretty easily, or we can fix it pretty easily. And it's really important that I get to class on time because my teacher's kind of a stickler about attendance. Right? You have to think about what are the likely outcomes of each option. Because you can't predict the future, you can't know for sure, but what are the likely outcomes? This is one of the things as a parent I say most often. Is my kids will do something stupid, because that's what kids do. And they'll hurt themselves, and they'll come to me like, Dad, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, the thing I always say is, what did you think was going to happen? Dad, I was waving a hot dog in front of the dog and it bit me. Well, yeah. Dad, I jumped off the roof and now my ankle hurts. Well, yeah. What did you think was going to happen when you did that? Right now, look, when my 7-year-old, when my 6-year-old does something like that, it's like, okay, y'all are figuring it out. When my 19-year-old does something like that, I get really fucking worried about him. It's like, how? What? That's the issue we're having right now. No offense, ladies, but we have a 16-year-old daughter who I'm going to murder. I'm going to murder her. And it's not her fault. All 16-year-old girls are horrible human beings. They're all despicable human. I don't know if you guys remember when you were 16, probably not that long ago. Every 16-year-old girl is Satan incarnate. And she's constantly doing stupid shit. And what bothers me is she thinks she can get away with it. Like I'm fucking dumb. That's what I say to her. I'm like, do you really think you're smarter than me? You can't even fucking spell stupid. You think you're smarter than me? Let's do this, bitch. She's constantly, I love her. I do. I love her dearly. But constantly, like, she'll sneak out, right? She'll sneak out at night to go fucking smoke weed with her friends, right? And we'll catch her. Because she's stupid, right? We'll catch her, and she'll, oh, well, can I go to somebody's house tomorrow then? What? Really? Every time we give her a consequence. Oh, that's not fair. You fucking did it, bro. Like, this was you. You have to think about the consequences of your decisions, or else you're either A, fucking child, or B, never going to be a good critical thinker. You have to think about possible consequences and factor that into your decision making. We use data, facts, and experiences in our decision making. Hopefully. Hopefully more data and facts than experiences. If you don't know how to change a flat tire on your car, can you make a good decision on whether or not you should drive or fix your tire? You're missing information. Right? If you decide to drive on a flat tire because your teacher was very, very stern about attendance and tardiness, but you didn't know that your teacher was just trying to sound tough, that's going to affect your decision making. The more information you have, the better decision you can make. That being said, I always like to point out something that Mark Twain said. Because Mark Twain said a lot of really smart shit. But my favorite Mark Twain quote is, never memorize something you can easily look up. And I like that. I like it a lot. Because, yeah. Why would I memorize something if I could just look it up? What? I don't win any prizes for being able to pull it from that. I'm not on fucking Jeopardy. You know? Like, and I say that knowing that, like, I have a shit ton of trivial knowledge in my brain. I don't know why. I think it's because I didn't have friends growing up, so I just watched a lot of Discovery Channel and, like, facts, you know? Nobody's saying you need to know everything, but you do need to know what you don't know. And acknowledge what you don't know. It's one of the hardest things for people to say anymore is, I don't know. Yeah. I love watching people dance around bullshit. You ask them a question, they're like, oh, well, you know, I thought, yeah, if you consider the alternatives, we can muster the facts of the... It's like, dude, just say you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Just own it. It's okay. It's okay. If you start talking to me about lacrosse, I have no problem telling you, I have no idea what the fuck you're saying right now. Well, because why would I? Why should I be expected to know everything? It's okay to not know everything so long as you know how to access it. Right? Literally the other day, my son's car had a flat tire in our driveway. He was supposed to go to work, but he had a flat tire. So he comes to the house, he's like, hey, a flat tire. I was like, okay, do you have a spare? I don't know. seriously, you don't even fucking know if your car has a spare tire? It's like, no. So I went out and looked, it's like, okay, so I had to teach my son, here's where your tire is, here's how you jack up a car, here's how you do these things. He's not gonna remember it, right? He's not gonna remember that. It's gonna take a while for him to figure it out. But how could he possibly make a decision on what to do if he doesn't even know all the options that are there for him, right? You have to be able to get at that data to make a good decision. We use that data to make inferences and judgments. Like assumptions, there are a lot of things we immediately judge on sight. And again, like assumptions, I would argue that's not a bad thing on its face. By itself, that's not terrible. That's just human nature. Again, like assumptions, however, we can't let that inference or that judgment replace the facts that come to us. We all have triggers, right? And I realize, like, saying triggers, people are like, oh, triggers, oh, stuff like that. That's not what I fucking mean. Right? Like, we all have things that bother us for personal reasons. We all have things that remind us of something we don't like, right? Fun story for you. True story. My wife's name is Heather. My ex-wife's name is Heather. In college, I was engaged to a girl named Heather. It's fucking weird. I don't know. I can't explain it all. They're three Heathers. Yeah, like a buddy of mine actually had a great idea. He said I should get a tattoo on my chest that says Heather crossed off, and then Heather crossed off. And then I was like, that's fucking funny. I like that a lot. I might do it. I still might do it. Because of that, I'm not allowed to call my wife by her name. She legitimately gets fucking mad at me. Like, she gets pissed. Like, if I call her Heather, she does that, like, demon head turn thing. She's like, excuse me? I'm like, it's your fucking name, bro. Like, because in her head, the name Heather is what I say when I'm mocking her. Because I'm calling her my ex-wife, who is a whore. We went over this the other day. She's a whore. So for my wife, she has an immediate inference to her own fucking name. Because of her experiences, it completely changes the way she takes in that data. Only for me, right? Everybody else, you can call her Heather, because if you call her Pookie, we're going to have a fucking discussion. Right? Like, you can call her Heather. I'm not allowed to. Because of that difference in history, because of those experiences. We all do that, right? We all have those little things that make us immediately react negatively or positively, or some kind of a way. Regardless of what it actually is, just because of our experiences. We immediately make a judgment to it. We immediately infer something from it. Right? That's our responsibility to deal with. We have to account for that in our decision making. Is this actually a bad idea, or do I just think it's a bad idea because it's associated with somebody I didn't like in the 8th grade? Is this actually a good idea, or is it just that it reminds me of my son, and therefore I'm more partial to it? Is that my inference getting in the way, or is it the nature of the actual subject? We use data based on concepts and theories. Based on concepts and theories. How many of you know what your major is? You know what you want to do for the rest of your life? Okay, seeing no hands. Which is, by the way, perfectly legitimate. That's why going to community college is the smart thing to do. It's because in 6 months you're going to have a totally different fucking worldview. So, one of the criticisms and complaints I hear a lot from students is, why do I have to take this class? Right? And I did the same thing. Right? When I was in college, I did the same thing. Why do I have to fucking take chemistry? I want to be a speech teacher. Why would I take chemistry? Right? Why do I have to take foreign language? Why do you think that is? Why do we make you take gen eds?
Because there will be a time where we have to face those
You think that we believe one day you'll really need Algebra 2 to save your life?
Well, not that, but like other things.
I took Portuguese. You know the likelihood of me ever ending up in Brazil or Portugal or the Philippines? Fucking slim to none. I didn't take Portuguese because my advisor was like, I don't know, man, your career path might one day take you to the Amazon. No! I took Portuguese because I had to take a foreign language and it was a 1-year instead of 2-year track. I'm like, fuck it, I'll do that. I don't remember any of it. Here's the only Portuguese I remember. Ela está no mato sem cachorro. Which means you're in the forest without a dog. Yeah, it's an expression in Brazil. It's kind of like you're up a creek without a paddle. Ela está no mato sem cachorro. It's the only Portuguese I remember. So then why the fuck did I take that class? There's an actual reason. You guys want to know the actual reason? Money. No, I'm sorry. I know that's what you're thinking. I can see it. You're like, it's fucking money, bro. Yeah, it's not actually, but it's because your brains are still developing, and you have different parts of your brain that are responsible for different functions. But you also have different parts of your brains that are responsible for different parts of learning. And we need to activate those parts to remain healthy, right? To keep them growing. Like any muscle in your body, you stop using it, it starts to decay, starts to atrophy. Same with your brain. We need to challenge those different parts of your brain for overall brain health, but also because of this idea of cross-application of learning, which is a concept we don't talk nearly enough about in education. But I fucking love it when somebody's in my class and they're like, oh, that's just like what we talked about in Rabbit's class. That reminds me of what we talked about in Julie Hartman-Link's class. I fucking love it. Because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be able to take what you learned here, see how it interacts with this over here, and form new understandings, not only about that, but about the fucking world at large. You've all heard you've heard of Henry Ford, right? You're familiar with Henry. Who was Henry Ford?
The founder of Ford.
The founder of Ford Motors, right? A lot of people very understandably, but unfortunately, think that Henry Ford invented the assembly line, right? That's one of the claims to fame people say with Henry Ford. If you go to the Chrysler plant in Belvedere, by the way, which is fucking amazing. My wife used to work for a supplier. They produce a car in less than 2 minutes. Yeah. My wife used to work for a company that made the interiors of the doors. That's it, they just made the interior of the door. Not the whole fucking door, just the inside part of the door. They would send over the inside of the door. Another company would send in the outside of the door. Another company would send in the frame. Another company would send in the engine block. Another company would send in all these. So all these pieces are coming from different places. And all they do at the Chrysler plant is you put the body of the car, you put the frame of the car on this track, and it rolls down this incredibly long factory line. And at station 1, all they do is install the engine block. That's all they do. All day long. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. Next stage. Okay, now we're gonna put on the front panels. Just all day long, that's all you're doing. The assembly line process streamlined the industrial age, right? It streamlined the idea of how we manufacture. Because prior to that, you had a team build a car. That takes a long ass time. It's also a lot of training, because you've got to know every part of the car to build it. With the assembly line, I can specialize. I can train quicker, I can move volume quicker, to the point where now it takes 2 fucking minutes to build a car. It's insane. Henry Ford didn't invent the assembly line. The assembly line had been around for literally thousands of years prior to Henry Ford. It was called farming. That's how agriculture works. You don't have one guy who cuts down the hay and then bundles it and then throws it on the tractor. You got one guy cutting, you got one guy baling, you got one guy hucking. It's an assembly line. All Henry Ford did was think like a farmer. He was in an industrial environment and went, Farmers do this really well. Let's use that. Revolutionize the way we produce products in the whole world. Because he just thought like a farmer. That's really what our hope is by giving you all these gen ed classes. Is that, yeah, one day you might be a chemical engineer, and you're probably not going to need to know who invented the movable type. You know, you will never think of Philo T. Farnsworth again in your life. But by teaching your brain how to work in these different ways, maybe one day as a chemical engineer, you go, wait a minute. I remember how Farnsworth was able to take the cathode ray and convert. Holy shit, that's just like this problem I'm working out. That's the real hope. Is that you will be so rounded, you'll be able to see problems from new perspectives. Because you'll have a different theory you can work from, a different concept of the world you can work from to solve that problem. We use data to answer a question or solve a problem. You've got to know what the real question is. You've got to know what the real problem is. My favorite example of this is when you ask somebody, do you know what time it is? Because if I ask you, do you know what time it is? What's your instinct?
Look at the time.
To look at the time. To tell me the time. But is that what I asked you for? No. What did I ask?
If you know the time? If you know the time?
I asked if you knew it. I asked you a yes or no question, and yet your immediate impulse is to tell me what time it is. It's not what I asked you. This is a really good thing to remember when you're taking tests. That's just a general test-taking skill, is to say, what's the question actually asking? Not what am I assuming because it used this word. Oh, I know that vocabulary word. It means blah, 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 blah. But yeah, but the question is not asking what is it. It's asking how do you use it. You've got to know what the real issue is you're addressing if you're going to address it properly. Again, if I'm figuring out what to make for dinner tonight, right? The question I'm trying to address is not what can I make. The question I'm trying to address is what will my kids eat? What can I actually produce efficiently and cost effectively that my children will consume? Because if it was up to me, I'd be eating fucking steak every night. My kids aren't going to do that. So sometimes, like, all right, we're having fish sticks. If my wife and I are both working late, it's like, all right, we're going to order pizza. Because the question isn't what's best for us. The question is, what can we do? What will our children eat, given the constraints? We've got to work within the scenario we're actually in. So we have these 8 structures of thought. We have these 8 different modes that we have to go through to consider our decisions and whether or not we're making a good one. So I'm going to put it to the test, right? I'm going to put a couple questions up on the screen. And I want you to just weigh them out, okay? The likelihood is that you're going to see a question and have an immediate response. An immediate yes or no thought. But hold on to that. And go back through those 8 structures and see if you end up at the same place. And you might, and that's fucking great. That's fantastic. If your reactionary answer is the same as your well-considered answer, fuck yeah. But if your reactionary answer is different from your considered answer, fuck yeah too. Because now you have an explanation for it. So we'll go through these real quick and then we'll have a little bit of talk. Should the media take some blame for our violent culture? And again, sit with it for a minute. It's a big topic of discussion these days, right? Violence in media. Should the media have some blame? Should we lay some blame at the feet of Hollywood for the fact that we have so much violence built into who we are? Is the media biased? Again, very likely you're going to have an immediate, well, duh. What are the assumptions you're making? What is the question actually getting at here? Do you have data to support your conclusion? Or is it just an inference you make? Does consolidated media ownership hurt democracy? What? Usually I put that question up there and people are like, I know like 2 of those words. I don't know what you're getting at here. How could you possibly answer that question if you don't know what consolidated media ownership is? Right? So let's go back to the top. Should the media take some blame for our violent culture? How many of you, your initial impression is to say yes? Raise your hand. Anybody? No, they don't. They shouldn't bear any blame. Okay. Why not? Why do you think not? Mike, right?
Yeah.
Why not, Mike?
Well, I think history shows that people already have their own violent tendencies. I think
Sure.
people are going to find a way to do that regardless. And there's plenty of examples of people watching violent media, not European violence. Also, people who aren't exposed to that kind of thing can become violent on their own.
Sure.
So I think that's more dependent on human impulses by themselves. Because, and also, throughout history, there's always been kind of some form of media blame for the ills of society.
Sure. Genghis Khan didn't play any video games.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the violent media that Genghis Khan was consuming?
He didn't even know how to read.
Exactly. Fucking idiot. What, those of you who say yes, your reaction was yes. Why do you say yes? And again, there's no right or wrong. So legit, I want to understand the perspectives.
I think there can be blame placed on like a lot of things, not just media, but
Yeah.
not necessarily saying they should be like ridiculed for it, you know. So.
Yeah. It's the question doesn't say should they take the blame.
Yeah.
Does violent media contribute at all to violence in society? That's a very different question than does the media create violence in society? Curiosity, how many of you, raise your hand if you think violence in the United States has gone up over the last 20 years? Do you think we're more violent now than we were 20 years ago? Because that's a question we can actually answer. Do you know what the real answer is?
Things have gone down, right?
Way down. Violent crimes have decreased every year for the last 30 years. We are a far more civil, far more peaceful society today than we've ever been. But why do we feel like we're not? Access. Because you see it everywhere. My dad grew up in Apple River, right? Podunk-ass little town in Jennings County. 200 people in that town growing up, right? Everybody knew everybody. There was no social media, but everybody knew everybody. I remember a couple of years ago there was a murder in Apple River. Yeah, exactly. I was like, what? The fuck? Like, it really freaked me out. I was watching the television. I was watching TV news. I was watching local news. And they reported on a murder in Apple River. I'm like, what? How? That can't, no, there's no. And I remember immediately feeling like, number one, this is so out of place. There's no way this could happen. And number two, oh my God, the world's going to hell. Now there's even a murder in Apple River. It wasn't the first time there'd ever been a murder in Apple River. I wasn't aware of it before. You know, I grew up in Rockford. I'm from Rockford. I live outside of Rockford now. I love Rockford. I realize it's fun to shit on Rockford, but I actually love Rockford. It's like my cultural heritage. My grandpa owned a business in Rockford for 70 years. He never left. You know, like I have deep roots. I love Rockford. I also love teaching out here and watching people's reactions when I mention Rockford. They're terrible. Oh my God. Kids in Stockton, you say Rockford, and they're like, that's where you go to die. No, fucking not. I'm living proof Rockford is not nearly as tough of a town as you think it is. Look, I'm here. I'm a pasty white, smart-ass motherfucker, and I'm not getting killed. How dangerous can it be? But what are the assumptions we make about it? And why? Media. Every story we see, every story we hear. Right? Is the media biased? How many of you say yes? I think the media is biased. How many? Any no's? No? Why do you say the media is biased? What's your basis for that to say?
I think in a sense people are kind of inherently biased, but also just generally most media kind of has its own audience it's usually shooting for, and also a lot of times whoever's funding or backing it will have their own bias, and that just kind of will feed into it no matter what.
It's run by people who are inherently biased, and it's a business. What kills me about this is when you say media bias, how many people go, they get so fucking worked up about it. If I changed one word in that sentence, is the automotive industry biased? Why don't you get worked up about that? Nobody gets worked. Nobody's like, yeah, fucking bigot, Ford. Nobody gets worried about the bias of the oil industry. Why are we only worried about bias that applies to media?
It's because the media affects like our thoughts.
So does Coca-Cola.
A lot of people get their like information and they resort back to media.
The other huge kind of inference we make when we have this conversation is one of the things I like to point out is, so what do you think the bias is for Universal Pictures? What do you think the bias is of Schuster Books? What do you think the bias is of Google? You think Snapchat has a bias? Because the question is the media biased? But your brain is thinking, is the press biased? The press is not the media. The press is a small one part of the media. You ever think about bias in film? You don't think about bias in the business of book publishing or magazine publishing? It's the damn media's fault. I don't think any of my beliefs came from playing video games. I honestly don't. I can reevaluate and say I don't think Super Mario Brothers affected the way I see the world in a ethical or moral way. So then why are we saying media? Furthermore, so fucking what if they're biased? Why is that bad? Aren't you? My mom's biased as fuck. I still like her. Might even go so far as to say I love her. She's my mom. It's okay. Why are these human beings on TV not allowed to be human beings? Do you think the fact that I've worked in media affects how I view that question?
Yeah.
Goddamn right it does. Because when people talk about media bias, I don't think about Brian Williams. I don't think about national figures. I think about the friends I have who are local news anchors and local news reporters. And I'm like, no. I fucking know Joey. No. It's personal to me. Right? I have to check my point of view on that question all the time. But other people need to check their point of view too. You don't know these people, but you're making these horrible judgments about them. We're over time because you guys wouldn't shut the fuck up. So, all right. So I want you guys to think about these more over the weekend, right? Just kind of keep processing this. We'll start Monday by talking a little bit more about this, kind of going more into it, and then we'll move right into the chapter 1 stuff, the kind of the overview of mass media as a aspect of culture, aspect of society, all that kind of good stuff. So, have a good weekend. Don't get corona. Drink Coronas. Drink it up. Do your thing. If you're 21. If you're 21. If you're not 21, shame on you. You know better. If you're 21, smoke it up. I don't care. Do whatever you want. No judgments. And I'll see you guys on Monday.